Hello there, everybody. Adam Clery from FourFourTwo. Welcome to another week on planet Earth. The nights are dark, the mornings are darker, but at least you have YouTube. Now today, we are going to be looking at Newcastle United and at Arsenal, and specifically how Newcastle United beat Arsenal. But you may be thinking, don't you normally do the big Sunday game? And wasn't it like Man United versus Chelsea yesterday? And yes, you're right, we would normally be covering that, but I'll tell you why we're not, okay? It was crap. It was just so crap, and I fell asleep. So instead, up the mags. Alright, so obviously Newcastle versus Arsenal at St James's Park last season, probably the most discussed game of the season from a controversy perspective, but this time, equally newsworthy, I think, but from a tactical one. Now, on the one hand, we have Arsenal here in this sort of like makeshift 4-4-2 that Arteta has settled on because of the numerous injury problems they have. They don't have Martin Ødegaard because he's hurt his ankle, they don't have Ricardo Calafiori because he's hurt his knee, and they don't have 𝗕𝗓𝗓𝗏 because he plays for Newcastle. Now, in the real world, this is obviously not an injury crisis, but the players they are missing are very important for how they play, so it's forced this sort of quite awkward reshuffle. But as for Newcastle, though, no such worries on the injury front, although obviously you would want 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 here if possible, but instead, they returned to their classic piss-boiling 11 from 2 years ago. You got Joelinton and Willock pretty much job-sharing over on the left-hand side, and Anthony Gordon answering the age-old question of what would this team look like if Almiron was good. Now, immediately, straight off the bat, these formations are a bit of a win for Newcastle, because what Mikel Arteta likes to do with this 4-4-2 is still find a way to dominate the centre of the pitch, both physically and numerically, like they did against Liverpool. And how that works is that Mourinho will sit, Partey will invert, Rice will push on, and Havertz will drop back, and you'll kind of end up with what they normally like to go with, which is sort of like this 3-box-3. And this Newcastle midfield is just not the sort of team you should be expecting to do this against, because Joelinton will so happily follow Thomas Partey back into the middle. You've got Bruno sitting at the base, who's one of the most combative all-action number 6s in the Premier League. Sean Longstaff's reading of the game really makes up for a lack of physicality. And then there's Joe Willock, who's just sort of legs and energy and progression breaking out of these areas is a real nightmare for teams that want to dominate the ball. Like Newcastle fans, you might have seen that stat that Newcastle have never lost a game when Joelinton, Willock, Bruno and Longstaff all start together. And that is because in terms of complementing skill sets for a midfield battle, they're basically like the Avengers of the midfield. Like if you go look at the stats from the game and you rank all 8 of these players in terms of the number of individual duels they won, the top 4 ranked players are Newcastle's 4 players, and the bottom 4 ranked players are Arsenal's players. So this matchup of systems and personnel just immediately gave Arsenal 2 fairly major problems. Like you've got Havertz and Partey both coming into this area where they're not really contributing anything. Newcastle are dominating that midfield battle, meaning they're fairly redundant. And the knock-on effect of that is unable to mix it up in the middle. It meant the vast majority of possession they had, and I'll overlay all their passes here, tended to be just in front of Newcastle. They had no real way of getting in between them, and they had no real intent, and we're going to talk about this later, on getting around them. Now, this is obviously extremely messy, so it's quite hard to see the point I'm making, but if I just show you all of Arsenal's passes for the last 30 minutes, so when they're really on top, they're pushing for that equaliser, Newcastle are getting deeper and deeper. This is every successful pass they made. And what should be glaringly obvious looking at this is just how safe it all is. Like, there's a complete lack of incision between any of Newcastle's lines. They can't get through the middle. They can't get round the sides. It's just going from left to right across the pitch before eventually somebody sticks a cross in or somebody has a shot. It's not opening up the opposition at all. And this was Newcastle's game plan, like right from the very first minute. Like, be really difficult for Arsenal to break down. Maximise the fact that Ødegaard isn't there to unpick a defence. Fight them for the middle of the pitch and win that fight. And when you do get the ball back, get it up the other end of the pitch as quickly as you can. Turn them, make them face their own goal, and just revel in the chaos. And weirdly, for all of Arsenal's successful passes shows you the problems they were having, right? Newcastle's unsuccessful passes sort of shows you what they were doing well. So this is also sort of like the last 30-35 minutes of the game when Newcastle were defending really deep, right? This is every unsuccessful pass they had. And what do you notice about all of them? They're getting the ball back so often in this central area, and then they're going long, they're going direct, they're going through Arsenal, they're going over Arsenal. And yes, all of these balls do get returned, but it just shows you the intent. It shows you how they're trying to find Gordon, find 𝗍𝗏𝗧𝗏, find Joelinton. But the thing is, it wasn't really a game plan that was sort of based around a team's passing. It was way more about the running for Newcastle. And there's one chance that sort of illustrates this better than anything. Like, this is right at the start of the second half. Arsenal are just again knocking it left and right. No real idea how to get through Newcastle. Note as well, despite the fact they're in Newcastle's half, just how many Arsenal players are behind the ball, how few risks they're taking. But anyway, as they did for pretty much the whole game, Newcastle then get into that central area with them, win the ball, and it's not then about retention or recycling it or moving it back and resetting. It's about getting forward as quickly as possible. Like, as soon as they've got the ball, 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 is off, charging up the other end of the pitch. And just make a note of this, these are the Arsenal players immediately around Willock. When he gets the ball, they work it up the other end of the pitch, they get a chance out of it, and when that ball does come back to Willock, these are those same players. Like, the intent, the drive, the determination to get up the other end was not being matched by Arsenal. And now, I'm not really sure what order to do the rest of this video in, because we do need to mention... Nah, it. Sean Longstaff. So, for the second season in a row, Sean Longstaff has lost his place in the Newcastle United starting 11, and for some reason, they just don't look anywhere near as good, and then he comes back in, and immediately, they can just play again. How weird. And as was pointed out by my good pal TT9M over on Twitter, someone in the Guardian comment section, after the Chelsea game, called him the onion in the bolognese, and that is so perfect. I am insanely jealous I did not think of that. And I know it sounds underwhelming and it's really easy to miss when you watch the game, but just think about the goal, right? Longstaff's not involved in that really. He plays a really simple pass out to the right-hand side, but just rewind it a little bit and really look at what he's doing. Newcastle are attacking here, and Anthony Gordon, who's playing on the right, has come into the centre to try and do some stuff on the ball, right? But 𝗍𝗏𝗧𝗏 drives a goal and loses possession. Now, what Longstaff is trying to do here is cut out this ball from, I think that's 𝗕𝗫𝗏𝗧𝗏, to Martinelli, but Arsenal do that too quickly. He can't get there in time. So what does he do? Does he stand there and watch it roll past him? No, he curves his run. He does not know Gordon has made up all this ground. He's still looking at the ball to get back and double up on Martinelli, not leave Livramento exposed. Now, Gordon and Livramento both work really hard and they get back in here. They force Martinelli to cut back inside. But because he's made the run, look who's there to now pinch the ball off him rather than giving him a really easy pass back into 𝗕𝗫𝗏𝗧𝗏 or back to his fullback. And it's just a small thing. Like, it's really easy to miss when you're actually watching it live, but that's really good reading of the game. That's really good application of running. He gets that ball back for Newcastle, and from there, they score the goal. And there is even subtler stuff than that. Like, Newcastle's goal comes initially from this long ball by Fabian Schär, right? And when Schär gets on it, Longstaff is here, but then, weirdly, he trots into a position where he can't possibly receive the ball. Like, when he initially gets it, he could receive it to feet, he could drop short, he could be an option for him, but instead, he jogs behind Martinelli, taking himself out as an option. Why? Well, because Merino is not only marking him tightly, he's also standing directly in this passing lane between Schär and 𝗍𝗏𝗧𝗏. So Longstaff, recognising this, moves out of that area to see if he can take Merino with him, which he does. Now, Schär doesn't take him up on this option. He tries to get Willock in over the top instead. But if you just look at it here, and then we look at it just a second or two later, Longstaff has opened up this 2 feet, like 20-yard ball between Schär and 𝗍𝗏𝗧𝗏, which arguably is a much better pass to make in that situation. Now, it's almost impossible to see that when you're actually watching a game of football. Like, oh, look at that subtle bit of movement and the avenue it opened up. But that is Sean Longstaff's game. He's not thinking, can I get on the ball and turn and go and do something exciting with it? He's like, oh, Fabian Schär and Alexander ဣsak could do something here. If I move him, I'll do that. And then from there, the chance develops. And when it comes to Longstaff, he's in a really good position. He's found a bit of space on the edge of the box. He plays a perfectly weighted pass out to Anthony Gordon. Those are just the basics. You don't really get a gold medal for doing them, but he does them all the same. And from there, Newcastle score. But for a player you don't think was involved in that goal at all, he's involved 3 times in really important ways. And I'm not kidding, I could do another 20, 30 minutes of this video just purely on Sean Longstaff. I've been back through the game, all the small little things he does that you probably wouldn't have noticed when watching it, but made a massive difference to how Newcastle were playing. Like, I thought 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏 had an excellent game against Martinelli, but for the first hour or so, Arsenal were really targeting that side of the pitch. And a handful of times they did manage to get in behind him or get around him. Here is Sean Longstaff covering over. There was one in the box where he just fell over 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏, and Longstaff was straight out there making sure they couldn't exploit it. In the second half, where they were defending really deep, he made these 2 absolutely massive tackles on 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏 and Declan Rice. And then going the other way, there were other times where he recognised a bit of space developing, like here is 𝗓𝗍𝗍 dropping off the line, so he makes the counter run to get in behind. This one in the first half's absolutely brilliant. He's the first player on the pitch to recognise this space developing, makes the run into it, and if Bruno could find him, he would have been in. There's loads of just tiny little things as well that nobody ever seems to spot. Like, Newcastle get this throw in on the halfway line. Longstaff's right in the line of it. Looks like that's where it's going. But right before it's taken, he runs miles out of the space to a position he's never going to receive the ball. Marino reacts, goes with him. And that means that 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 doesn't just throw it to 𝗓𝗍𝗍𝗍. He could probably go over them if he wanted to. But he means he can throw it into the ground, thus killing all the momentum on the ball. So it's so much easier to control. Like, that's stuff that they've clearly worked on. That's like how important Longstaff is to this team. And then, of course, when 𝗓𝗍𝗍𝗍 does get it under control, who's now slipped his marker and everybody else to be an easy option to receive it? Sean Longstaff. And don't get me wrong, like, one day Newcastle United aspire to be the sort of like possession dominant, technically excellent side that won't need a player like Sean Longstaff to fill all those gaps or make all those runs. But until they are, you can't not have him. Like, this is an awful thing to say, right? But it is my truth. I simply must voice it. If you have ever said anything horrible about Sean Longstaff to me, like either in real life or on the internet, right? I have probably never taken a single word you've said after that even remotely seriously. I'm sorry, like, to me, from then on, you are a buffoon. You wear a hat with a little propeller on it in my head. Anyway, though, that's Newcastle 1-0 and why Sean Longstaff is amazing. But why couldn't Arsenal do anything about this? Like, Arteta's normally so good from his bench. He's normally so good at figuring out these problems. And if anything, Arsenal looked less effective as the game went on. Well, as we alluded to earlier in the video, Newcastle's out of possession shape wasn't this 4-3-3. It was actually like a 4-4-2 with Joe Willock pressing with 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. The only difference is, this was it in their own half when they got nice and deep and nice and flat and they made those lines hard to break down. In Arsenal's half, they would do like a diamond. Willock and 𝗓𝗍𝗍𝗍 would lead the press with Newcastle's wide players sticking to the fullback, so they weren't an option, and they were leaving David Raya alone for the most part, focusing on the centre-backs, but doing that nice curved run thing where you leave someone in the cover shadow or shadow cover, never sure which one it's called, to try and take them both out as an option. But when Arsenal inevitably dropped a player into this position to try and get it, they would then morph this into a diamond. Bruno, it almost always was, who would then jump on this player to try and force him to play backwards into these areas, and then Longstaff would make sure there was no easy over-the-top ball into either Havertz or 𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. Now, this is a good example from the opening couple of minutes. Newcastle put the squeeze on, they force Arsenal all the way back. Bruno's jump to make sure this pass into this area is not an option. It forces David Raya to go long, and for once this season, Newcastle actually have the bravery in the back line to step up with the press. They don't leave a huge gap, and that means that when it goes long, Dan Burn and Fabian Schär could gobble this up all day. And then, of course, when they did, and the ball dropped into the middle of the pitch, as we've discussed, Bruno, Willock, Joe Linton and Longstaff, they were winning that battle all day. Like, Arsenal had no way through this, really. But the thing about really aggressive high pressing is you can't really do it for 90 minutes, especially if you're defending a lead. So as the game went on, that nice high press from Newcastle, I'm stalling for time here, basically became a low block. And how do you then break down a low block? Well, step one, you create one-on-ones in wide areas, and step two, you win those. Now, Arsenal did the first part of that really, really well. Saka and Martinelli lined up against Hall and Livramento really frequently in this game. But the second part, winning them, they did not do well. Newcastle did well. This is every single successful defensive action of both Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall throughout those 90 minutes. They both put in possibly the single most dominant individual displays against Saka and Martinelli I have ever seen. And just to show you what an impact all of this made, right, I'll take away Livramento and Hall's combined defensive map, and I'll show you Martinelli and Saka's combined passing map. Other than this absolutely fantastic deep cross for Rice that, yes, fair play, probably should have scored, that's it. That's all the pair of them across 90 minutes were really able to contribute against these two players. Like, so many of Saka's passes are backwards in this area because he found Hall, he couldn't get turned, he couldn't get past him. There's virtually nothing at the bylines they couldn't get round either. Then again, away from the players, you go back to the manager. What do you do in these situations if you're creating these one-on-ones but you're not winning them? Well, you turn them into 2v2s. If your wingers are getting no joy against the fullbacks, then you need to have overlaps or underlaps involved, because then it doesn't become about these individual battles. You're asking Anthony Gordon and Joe Linton, will you go with the fullbacks? Will you also win that battle? And Arsenal just didn't do that, which is mad because he changed both of his fullbacks. Like Jurrien Timber, this is his heat map and his passing contributions. You'll see still all in this really safe area, did not get on the overlap. Once Thomas Partey, obviously he's not going to be doing that. His job was to move into the centre, but the subs should have changed it. Like, this is Zinchenko. I know he plays in the centre and he can do that, but he's also had a long career as a proper left back, and yet nothing into that space behind the fullback. No passes in those areas. All safe. Ben White as well. I know a centre-back by trade, but you've seen him do overlapping runs for Saka in certain situations, and yet nothing into that area. All safe possession. All left to right. No cut through whatsoever. When Willock went off for Tonali, Newcastle then basically had a 4-5-1 where they could sit very narrow, they could double up on every major threat, and without Ødegaard, Arsenal had no way of breaking that down. Even when they tried to be clever, Newcastle liked to do this sort of situational thing where Joe Linton goes into left back and then you end up with a 5-4 just if the situation requires it. So they kept mixing that up so they weren't predictable. So Arsenal constantly had to problem solve. And of course, on the one occasion, if we just look here, where Arsenal do successfully drag Newcastle all the way out while keeping these players on this side and create a massive hole, Bukayo Saka realises this is the chance he can finally get in. Who's alive to it? Who would have been straight in his face making sure that was not the opportunity it otherwise should have been? Sean Longstaff! So yes, to put that in far more simple terms, Eddie Howe got this absolutely bang on from the start, and when Arteta tried to change it, he got it absolutely bang off. And if you do that, you lose games of football. Right, anyway, yes, few little bits of housekeeping to the literal hundreds of you, I did count, who have done that Simpsons bit of asking, where is the Ruben Amorim video? When are you making the Ruben Amorim video? Why aren't you making the Ruben Amorim video now? I know I've said this a couple of times, studio access. I don't get to be in here as much as I need to be, which is obviously incredibly frustrating when something like that happens, but we are working on it. I have cancelled all my social life for this evening. I will get it recorded. We will have it in the next couple of days. It's coming. But more important than that though, right, for those of you based in the Northeast who have watched this video, our own deputy editor here at FourFourTwo, lifelong Newcastle United fan, Matthew Ketchell, has just completed running 5 kilometres every single day for Prostate Cancer UK. He's trying to raise some money for what is an absolutely sensational cause. He's been posting all of his runs. It is a superhuman feat of endurance, in my opinion. I certainly could not do that, and he's wrapping up his fundraising in the next couple of days. So if you do have a spare couple of quids and you think that is impressive, which it is, I'm going to put the link in the description and the comments below. We would really appreciate any donations we can help him out with. So yes, I'm going to check him a few quid this afternoon, and you should too. Other than that though, just the usual crack. The anniversary issue of the magazine is in stores now. You should absolutely buy that. The 30th anniversary shirt is still absolutely sick. By the way, I think there's some left. They may all be gone actually, but if not, you should buy one. Smells like new car. You can get me on all the socials at Adam Clery, Clery. The 442 socials are in the corner of the video. And until next time, which I promise is the Amorim video, I promise, we're going to get that done. I've been Adam Clery. This has been 442, and we're the lads. Bye.